at home in the night air. And yo, I'ma warn you one time, I don't fight fair. Cause I can bust you like a question mark block. Like a kick at you, I'll treat you to the school of hard shocks. Sharp blades like imperial rage, burn hot, expose plots, cut holes in eye sockets. Walk in apocalypse.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. Mtg, we like magic. And how was your last FNM? Did you encounter the red menace? Odds are you probably did, because it's kind of everywhere and spreading like wildfire right now. It's a fun, fast, reliable, competitive deck that's relatively budget to build. I don't blame anyone for playing it, but if you're already getting sick of it, how do we combat it? That's what everyone's asking me and every other YouTuber. So today, I'm going to give you a deck that is not only budget and specifically tuned to throw red deck wins into garbage bins. I worked way too long on that for it to be such a bad joke. But it also survives the upcoming fall rotation. Every single card in the list is rotation proof. You're able to play this deck for well over a year, and it's only like 50 bucks. Here is white-black aggro. But before I jump into it, let me let you know that all the prices in this video are from tcgplayer.com, who are good enough to sponsor my content. So, if you're interested in viewing this deck list or even buying it, you can just click the first link in the description box down there. It'll take you right over to TCG Player. You can check out the deck from there. It helps the channel out just by clicking the link, and it helps you out because it's a super cheap deck. So do that, and let's go ahead and look at this thing. We'll start with the creatures here, and we're fighting fire with fire. We're playing 28 creatures and a couple of vehicles too. That's a lot of stuff. So let's go ahead and start with the one-drops here. We're going to play playset of Sacred Cat. Yeah, seriously, Sacred Cat. You heard me right. A whole playset of this. If we're tuning to play against Mono Red, this is a surprisingly good card. There's a lot of cards like that in this deck, actually. But Sacred Cat can represent a couple of points of life gained, a couple of creatures chump blocked, or in some cases even traded with, which is just amazing, especially considering that this can sometimes represent a sort of 2-for-1. If we can block a Falconwrath Gorger and trade with it, then later maybe block a Bomac Courier or something, trade with it, then we have effectively killed two guys and gained a couple of life. That's amazing, and it's not usually going to happen, but Sacred Cat can threaten to do that, and that can be just as important, man. The cat's where it's at. Don't underestimate it. Here's another weird one-drop to round out the one-drops. We're going to play 3 copies of 4th Bridge Prowler in the deck, seriously. Obviously, if you're on the play and you play it turn 1, it's a 1-1 that doesn't do anything else, you know. But being realistic, you'll more often play this turn 2, 3, 4, and obviously you don't have to play it turn 1. If you know you're up against Mono Red, well, wait until turn 2, wait until turn 3, and play it on top of a 2-drop, you know. You'll usually kill one of their guys. You can kill a Village Messenger that hasn't transformed, Bomac Courier, Earthshaker Kinra, Falconwrath Gorger. Most of the cards in their deck you can kill with this thing. You can go through your combat step, and then if they didn't do the math right, you can sometimes just kill a creature when you play 4th Bridge. There's a lot of cool things about this card, and I don't think it's the best card in the format or anything, but for what we're trying to do here, it works really well. Here's a much easier to explain card. We're going to play 4 copies of Glory Bound Initiate because it's really good. Can I should probably still keep talking about it though. Now, if you can just attack with this once or even twice, God forbid, you can attack with this once or twice, then you're getting 4 to 8 life off of it. And yeah, it's a little weak to things like Spray and Shock, and they play those cards, but I think it's definitely worth the sort of risk-reward factor here, you know. If we get through just once with a Glory Bound Initiate, that can go a long way towards us winning the game. We're playing a lot of things in this deck that gain us life, and are on sticks, you know, that are also, you know, lifelink creatures, basically. Because that's a pretty effective way to combat red deck wins. But of all those cards, this is very likely the best or tied for first. I say tied for first because we're also going to play 4 copies of Gifted Aetherborn in the deck, which I have heard recently called the best 2-drop in the format. Now, in this deck, the mana is not always there for Gifted Aetherborn on turn 2. I have done what we can here to try and make sure the mana is as consistent as possible. Where we can play, like, you know, Sacred Cat turn 1, Gifted Aetherborn turn 2, off of a concealed Courtyard or something. We try to do that as often as possible, but it's not always there. But the good news is that against red deck wins, Gifted Aetherborn is also good on turn 3 or turn 4 even, sometimes. It's not great against Tazaret or anything, but if it can block, then it can live against most of that deck and gain you a couple of life and kill whatever it blocked against. So, and it kills literally everything in that deck other than Hazaret, even if it has to trade. Survive, Spray, and Shock, I should mention that too. Just like insanely good utility creature against Mono Red right now, so we gotta play all 4. Our last 2-drop is all a little bit weird, like a few of the cards in the deck, but we're trying to keep it really budget while still playing some relatively expensive stuff. So, keep that in mind when I show you 5-cent cards like our 2 of True Heart Duelist here. But also, this is another one you don't want to underestimate. Obviously, Mono Red won't always let you block, but when you can block, True Heart Duelist is an all-star and can come back too. Just like Sacred Cat, this gives us a little bit of resiliency in the deck. If we have to embalm it against stuff that's like really big, it doesn't really do much. But against Mono Red, embalming this can sometimes be really good. You'll have ended up blocking 4 dudes, killing a few too. So True Heart Duelist is actually a really good card, and I wouldn't mind it being a 3 of in the deck. I just can't find the slots. But into the 3 drops here, we're going to play a 3 of Aerial Responder in the deck, and the only reason we're not playing 4 is because it costs 2 white. I do think that Gifted Aetherborn is worth the 2 black on turn 2, but I don't want to turn around and have to get 2 white on turn 3 after 2 black for Aetherborn on turn 2. We're just trying to do a lot with our mana in this deck, and I don't want to stretch it too much, so I'd rather go with the 3 of here. But Mono Red is also extremely weak to this card. Mono Red does not like flyers whatsoever, and this can fly over with Vigilance every single turn, get through unblocked pretty much every time, survives Magma Spray, survives Shock, gets us 2 points of life gain literally every turn, and stays up to block. Everything about that is crazy. We are definitely going to play Responder in the deck, no questions asked. Now, I'm also going to play a 2 of Sunscourge Champion in the deck. This compares in some ways to Aerial Responder. It doesn't have the Vigilance or the Flying, which are both actually really important abilities, but this gains us life straight away. We don't have to attack or block with it or anything. Gains us life straight away upon entering the battlefield, and is yet another resilient card that we have. We have to discard a card to it to get it back from our graveyard, but we can essentially gain 4 more life and get a relatively big guy out of it. That's just so great. 6 life gained and a couple of creatures blocked over the course of a game against Mono Red is usually lights out. This card is incredibly effective, just like Responder, against Mono Red, but it's easier to cast, and we get it twice. Last 3 drop here. We are playing more 3 drops than any other kind of drop in the deck, but I want to go a little bit higher than Mono Red, but still keep our curve relatively low. That's why we're doing that. We don't play as many 1 drops. We're about the same number of 2 drops, and we play more 3 drops. Again, we want to go just a little bit above them without going so far above them that we're slow. So, with that in mind, our last 3 drop is Ammon Eternal, which is sort of like getting to play a 4 or 5 drop in some ways. A 5/5 just goes way over the top of almost anything but Hazoret, basically, in that whole deck. And yeah, it kind of sucks against Hazoret, but against literally everything else, it's really good. And that deck puts itself into top deck mode really, really quick. That's part of the point of the deck. You want to swing with Hazoret the turn it comes out. So, with that in mind, the deck empties its hand so fast that we usually won't have to worry about them playing 2 or 3 spells and making Amit really, really small. And this a 3-mana 5/5 is just unbelievable. It's a big threat. We don't have a whole lot of creatures like this in the deck that are good like finishers. A lot of our creatures are 1 or 2 power, and it's really hard to put a game away with that. So we need at least 1 or 2 relatively big dudes in this deck that can swing through and take big chunks of life out of our opponent. And honestly, this is one of the best things in the format for that because it costs so little. Ammon Eternal, definitely worth playing as far as I'm concerned. Last creature, though, in the only 4 drop, we're going to play 2 copies of Oketra the True, which is actually an amazing foil for Hazoret. If only she had Vigilance, that would be really cool, but Double Strike Indestructible is pretty dope, too. This is essentially a 6-power creature with 6 toughness. This is kind of 6/6. That's ridiculous. And it more or less just, like, stares down Hazoret, like it just cancels out Hazoret more or less, which is really awesome. And we can win War of Attritions this way too, Hazoret's going to be popping us for a couple of damage every turn. That kind of sucks, but we can make 1/1 warriors and win the stalemate that way, Not necessarily as fast or anything, but we can at least be sure that there's not a whole lot of ways they're going to be able to take care of this card. As a matter of fact, they have literally 0 ways of taking care of Oketra, and it more or less cancels out Hazoret from attacking. If that's all it's doing, we're more or less fine with that. But against a lot of other decks, or when they don't have their Hazoret, this also attacks really, really well. Oketra the True is great. In the deck with 28 creatures, she's almost always on, and of course, she can turn herself on too. So, just gotta play at least a couple of copies of Oketra, because again, we need another, finishing creature, and she does that job pretty well. Now we're going to play 2 vehicles in the deck, 2 copies of Ether Sphere Harvester because it's freaking perfect. We've got a bunch of 1-drops in this deck that only have 1 power, and stuff like True Heart Duelist that will sit on the battlefield and not be able to do much. a little bit later in the game. So all of those cards crew this really, really well. You know, fourth bridge just sitting there like a grapefruit, just being lazy, not attacking. Just like crew Ether Sphere with him, have him fly over, you know. So that's awesome. This also can give itself lifelink twice, which is sometimes all you need. You know, 6 life gained and fly over twice for 6 damage against mono red. Again, they're almost lights out in some ways. You know, you've just negated an entire attack step on their parts. They worked really hard for it. And you have a flyer that's flying over every turn. So just Ether Sphere is crazy. It is freaking crazy. Almost none of their removal is going to do anything about it. They usually have to double up on removal to actually kill this thing. Sometimes they can abrade it. That's the only problem. But if abrade's our only issue with playing Ether Sphere Harvester, I still think it's worth it considering everything it does against that deck. But we got to play some removal here. We can't just play... I mean, I guess we could play all creatures, but I don't know if I'd advise it. We're going to play 3 copies of Cast Out here in this deck because it can take out Hazoret, which again... If you haven't caught on to this by now, Hazoret is like the only thing we're scared of in mono red whatsoever. So Cast Out is a good flash option to be able to take care of a Hazoret. That's cool. And note that mono red like literally can't do anything about enchantments. So they can just sit there and watch their Hazoret do nothing. So that's cool. We can also cycle it if we need to. You know, we need a land or we're looking to draw something very specific. Cycling for only 1 can sometimes be really important. And this can like target planeswalkers. You know, red deck wins will usually either have in the main deck or side in some Chandra Torch of Defiance. Well, good answer for that too. So just a good catch-all for us. And random people that are trying to make like Fraying Sanity or New Perspectives a thing, yeah, you got something for them too. But after all the weird cards that you've already seen, this may be the weird. Fourth bridge is probably the weirdest, but this is in the running at least. I'm going to play 3 copies of Battle at the Bridge in the deck. No, seriously, hear me out. All I ask is that you hear me out. Now, obviously, the only artifact in the main deck here is Ether Sphere Harvester, so we're not going to be doing a whole lot of improvising. But I've actually sort of fallen in love with Battle at the Bridge. Now, the reason that we're playing this card is because we can't play Fatal Push because it's like almost $9 a piece. And it would be, you know, way more than half the budget of the deck to play Fatal Push. Now, if you have them, you should play them. If you got the money to get them and you just haven't got them yet, what are you waiting for to get your Fatal Pushes? Play them in this deck. So, just want to say that first, and I'll get to more upgrades after the sideboard. But, for now, Battle at the Bridge is actually kind of super impressive in some games. Now, against red deck wins, you'll sometimes only have to put 2 mana into this, you know, kill a god, gain a life. That's actually not bad. Like, as far as a floor on a card goes, kill Earthshaker Kenra, gain a life. That's good. But this can also kill gods, most notably Hazoret. I've been talking about that lady a lot in this video. But this can kill Hazoret, something else that can do that, not just Cast Out. Important to have multiple options against it. That's cool. And Fatal Push can't kill Hazoret, so there you go. But this can also kill, you know, like On-Crop Crasher for only 3 mana and gain you 2 life. Those kind of things are actually really awesome, and this is probably one of the best top decks in the deck. You get this on turn 6 or 7, and you put 5 mana into it, well, you're gaining 4 life, and you're killing one of the biggest things on their side of the board. And all I'm saying is if you don't have the Fatal Pushes, try out Battle at the Bridge, because against Mono Red, this card is going to do a lot of work for you, I promise. Let's take a look at our 24 lands here. And 24 may seem like a bit much for our curve, but I want to make sure that we hit 4 so we can get Cast Out, we can get a Ketra, that's important. And I also want to be able to make sure that we have the mana we need to be able to use Shefet Dunes and Ifnir Deadlands and keep using them if we have to, you know. We've got a couple of the Cycling Deserts in there to protect against Flood, so we've sort of tried to manage things. 24 seems like a lot, but it's actually, I think, the right number for this deck. Now, Concealed Courtyard is easily the most important land in the deck. You may be tempted to peel back on copies of that and just add more deserts or basic lands, but I highly recommend that you get your Concealed Courtyards. One of the worst things about this deck, honestly, is the mana within the first 2 turns, you know. You want to be able to do stuff like play Sacred Cat into, you know, Gifted Aetherborn. It's not going to happen very often, but this card makes it a possibility at the very least. So, really, really important card, and honestly, one of the most important cards in the entire deck for making sure that things run consistently. Aside from that, Ifnir Deadlands is actually pretty decent removal sometimes. It's again, not as bad as you might think it is, and there are decks, you know, Mono Black Zombies plays this, because why not? And I kind of feel the same way in this deck. Why not? You know, we've got a lot of life gain, so we can gain back the life that we're losing from these deserts. I'm not too worried about it. And as far as Shefet Dunes goes, This thing's crazy. He's actually really, really good sometimes. Chef at Dune's just basically giving us an Anthem effect for a turn is sometimes all we need. And especially with all of our life-linking creatures, that can make a big difference. Here's our sideboard right here. We're going to play 3 Authority of the Consuls because I think that is one of the no-brainers if you're trying to tune a deck against Mono Red right now. Aside from that, a lot of our slots aren't necessarily tuned to deal with aggro because the deck is already meant to deal with Mono Red aggro, so we don't have to devote too much of the sideboard against it. Turns out most of our other matchups are kind of bad because we tuned to Mono Red aggro, so we got to have stuff in there against our worst matchups. And Dreamstealer is one of those cards, you know. We're supposed to be a good deck against control because we're essentially an aggro deck, but we're nowhere near as fast as a mono red aggro deck. So if, you know, control can get to a sweeper or just spot remove a few of our dudes, sure, we've got some resiliency in our creature base, but they're a lot better at beating us than they are at beating mono red is all I'm going to say. So we need things like Freddy Krueger, Dreamstealer here, to make sure that we have some kind of advantage over those decks. And by the way, I just want to point this out, Dusk Dawn works really well with Dreamstealer. It also brings back Dreamstealers. So just want to point that out. But against the control matchup, Dawn obviously brings all the creatures back to our hand. They've either swept off the board or just spot removed, so that can be really important too. Just Dusk Dawn could almost be in the main deck, but it's so bad against mono red that I don't want that. It's the deck we're trying to beat in the main, so I just don't think it's worth carrying it in the main board. Doomfall is also there against the control matchup, and it's there to kill Bristling Hydras, two things that we hate. We don't really want to play against control that much, and we don't want to play against Bristling Hydra like at all. So it's really good against that as well. Forsake the Worldly is in over Fragmentize, because mostly I want to be able to kill Gear Hulks and stuff. The occasional Godfarrow's Gift or something. I just think Forsake is a little bit better, and also it can hit enchantments, so a little bit more broad too. And obviously Scrapheap Scrounger is another good card against control, yet another resilient creature. They already hate those, and Scrapheap is one of the best in the format when it comes to that. And this can tap down for, you know, improvising Battle of the Bridge, you know, worst case scenario. So we've also got that going for us. Just not a very good card against the aggro matchup, like whatsoever. We want creatures that can block when they have to, but really good in a lot of other matchups. So we'll play it in the board. But as far as non-budget options that are in Standard and will be in Standard for a long time to come, there's a few here. I think Gideon of the Trials is something I'd really like to try out. I wanted to keep this deck budget, so while I was building it, I didn't try out Gideon, but I do think he'd be a really good 3-drop that's probably dumb against mono red aggro. Like, if you can keep him protected, this card is probably going to give mono red aggro fits. So if you got the dough, I could definitely see slotting in a couple of Gids. There's also a huge gang of like white 5-drops that would work pretty well in this deck, but we're all either slightly out of budget, and there's also the idea that I didn't want to go too high up on the curve here. I want to keep things pretty condensed. But if you wanted to, especially again, mid-range sideboard plan, a lot of decks doing that, including mono red. So if you wanted to go along with that trend, you could always play Regal Caracal, a card that looks like it shuts down mono red if you can actually get it on the battlefield. There's also Angel of Sanctions, always a decent card for mid-range strategies, and even Angel of Invention looks pretty decent in this deck too. So you got a lot of options if you want to play white 5-drops. But here are your power rankings right here. Final score of 61, and a lot of our stats are relatively middle of the road, but that's what happens when you tune a deck to beat one deck. You know, we're mostly concerned about other matchups out of our sideboard. That's where we try to shore those up. But game one, we're trying to take down mono red, and we do it admirably. You will have a very favorable matchup against that deck, especially post sideboards when you get to bring in, you know, Authority of the Consuls and such. But what are we doing next time? That's important. Well, I'm going to give you two vastly different decks here, but they're both also going to be rotation proof. And one of them you've been waiting on for a while here, but you never know what's going to win these. I'm constantly surprised. So I can either show you post-rotation blue-white control next time. That's a fun deck. Or I can show you green-white cats finally, which is a deck a lot of people have been asking for. But again, there are a lot of people that want to see blue-white control. I know that for a fact. So let me know which one you want to see down there in the comments section. Fight about it. But don't worry, one way or the other, we will be doing green-white cats. At some point in the next month, we will do Green White Cat. So it's coming, I promise you that, regardless of what happens here. But vote for what you want to see and do all the other stuff. Like the video if you like the video, that just makes sense. Sub if you're new and you've never seen me before, but you actually want to see more of me. I know it doesn't happen every day. But sub if you're new, hit the bell for the notifications. You can follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. And again, if you want to look at or buy this deck list, just click the first link in the description, take you right on over to TCG Player where you can check all that stuff out. But till next time, y'all, I had fun. Try this thing out. There's a lot of weird stuff in it, but I promise it's going to do better than you might think, especially against Mono Red Aggro. It's going to do just as bad as you might think against other decks, but good against Mono Red Aggro. So try the thing out, and I'll see you cats next time. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.